this some kind of joke? I've been trick-or-treated to death tonight.
You don't know what death is.
What's going on, horror fanatics? Welcome to I Shot Him 6 Times YouTube horror movie channel. As you know, I'm your host and creator of the channel, Marcus, and in this video I will be discussing the original plans for Sidney Prescott's character in Scream 6. This comes from hellosidney.com's Rodrigo Kurtz, as he wrote an article showcasing details from a rough draft script for Scream 6. After reading what was intended, I am now convinced even more than I ever was before that a theory that I had after Scream 5 was released regarding both Sidney Prescott and Samantha Carpenter's characters may have been coming to fruition. If you haven't done so already, please shoot the video a like. It definitely helps out the YouTube algorithm a ton. And if you are new here to the channel, shoot the subscribe button followed by the notification icon so you get all the latest content updates to the channel. Okay everyone, so back in early June, an original rough draft script for Scream 6 was revealed, highlighting the plans for Sidney Prescott, her family, the core four, Gale Weathers, Kirby Reed, and more. And the article starts off by saying, fans are always eager to learn about alternate script drafts. Below I will detail how Sidney Prescott would have fit into the New York setting of Scream 6. Last week we were lucky to read an early draft of the 6-chapter script by James Vanderbilt and Guy Busick under the name Scream Again, originally the title of Scream 2, Gasp. Completed on February 11, 2022, before the paid dispute between Campbell and Spyglass, the script depicts Sidney's suburban life in Seattle and her role in the ensuing chaos. Due to copyright restrictions, the script was only available to review in person and was not available for copying or publishing in full. Thank you to our friend Brett for this fantastic scoop. Sidney Prescott in Scream 6, a breakdown. Sidney's first appearance in Scream 6 would have occurred after Dr. Stone's Henry Czerny's murder. Who in this version is watching Stab 2? We would have seen Tori Spelling reprising her role as movie Sidney, saying, "I can't believe I have to go through all of this again." It then cuts to Sidney dropping her 3 daughters, 10, 8, and 4, off at school. The oldest is named Hannah. Sid learns about Ghostface in New York from a school mom and rushes home to pack. Sidney's husband, Mark Kincaid, now a sheriff, confronts her. It is easy to envision Patrick Dempsey's Mark asking, "You spent the last 25 years running away from this stuff, and now you want to run towards it?" Sidney replies, "I need to make sure it doesn't end up on our doorstep because sooner or later, it always does." Mark warns, "You keep running after this. Someday you're not going to come back." Hinted at in Scream 2022, where only a baby stroller actually appeared, the Kincaid-Prescotts were initially scripted to appear in the 5th film as well. In short, a kitchen scene when Dewey, David Arquette, first calls Sid. Sidney arrives in New York after Annika's death and accompanies the gang to the shrine. In this version, a storage warehouse discovered by Kirby, not Gale. In an amusing bit, Sidney and Gale are equally baffled by Kirby's FBI status. Billy Loomis' mask is on display here, luring Samantha toward it. Sid, not Tara, asks what she is doing. In addition, the family conversation between Sam and Gale was initially a conversation between Sam and Sidney, with a focus on Sam's abandonment issues. The story then follows the group to the Central Park sequence where Tara, Mindy, and Chad try to find the killer among people in the park, while Sam talks with Ghostface. They only stop when Chad asks, "Isn't this how Uncle Randy died?" This distraction leads to Ghostface being one step ahead of our heroes, with Sam and Sid, not Tara, stealing Bailey's cop car to try to save Gale. As Sam and Sid would never make it in time, Sam contemplates calling Danny. In this version of the story, Sam and Danny are flirtatious neighbors but do not have an established relationship prior to the events of the story. Sidney, not Bailey, asks, or he can finish her off, is it possible he's the killer? Sam ends her call to Danny mid-dial, but Danny somehow shows up to save Gale anyway from a final fatal stab in her apartment. Paramedics take Gale into the ambulance. When asked by a paramedic if she is a family, Sid reflects on their shared experiences and indicates she is, and goes with Gale to the hospital, leaving Sam, Tara, and the others to formulate their own plan. Mark calls and Sid updates him on Gale's condition. Devastated, she replies, "But everyone leaves these girls." Sid promises to return to Seattle as soon as she knows Gale is okay, but later breaks this promise when Sam calls from the warehouse where the 3rd act begins. There, Kirby is stabbed by Ethan with Charlie's knife and ambiguously left for dead again, as Kirby is not seen or referenced again after this point in the script. Sidney arrives at the last minute to drop the TV that killed Stu onto Ethan's head, saying, "Second time I've done that, if you can believe it. Works every time." When Tara asks Sidney how she found them, she raises her phone and indicates the Find My Fam app. When Sam tells Sidney she missed the killer's monologue, Sidney replies humorously, "Oh, thank God." Sidney tells the Carpenter sisters they are her chosen family. the final scene largely remains the same. Chad is miraculously found alive, and although Mindy also survives, she is off-screen at the hospital and not present at the end. Sam tosses Billy's old mask into a wet gutter and follows Tara and Sidney into the light. Okay everyone, so real quickly touching on the Kirby Reed and Mark Kincaid bits from the original draft of the script. Mark was slated to be the sheriff of the town that him and Sidney and the family are residing in, so it does confirm that he is still in fact in law enforcement like we all expected, and I think the dialogue written for him in this original draft was spot on. It makes perfect sense why he would say what was said to Sidney, though it does seem his role would have been very limited. I do expect the plans for him in Scream 6 to be incorporated into his return in Scream 7 if he does indeed return like we all expect. Definitely does seem it's going to happen in terms of him still being in law enforcement, and I do think that his role will be larger based on all of the changes we're going through with the direction of the film and the franchise in general. As for Kirby, I do not like the idea of having her stabbed and left for dead without any conclusion as to if she is dead or alive for a second time. I already kind of feel they botched the character a bit with the version of her that we got in Scream 6, and I think having that scenario happen to the character once again for a second time would have only ruined her return even more, considering it seems most of what we got from the character in Scream 6 wasn't much different from this original draft outside of her inconclusive dead or alive status at the end. Now on to the Sidney role in this rough draft, and my initial reaction was,
what the fuck are they doing?
It makes absolutely no sense in my opinion for Sidney to find out about Dr. Stone's murder through a school mom in Seattle, when most likely when Greg and Jason's murders happened, Gail Weathers would have called her just like she called Samantha Carpenter. So in my opinion, this would have been a really weak way to introduce Sidney into Scream 6. Now, it does seem we were going to get introduced to all three of Sidney and Mark's kids in Scream 6, but would have still made that revelation of them having three kids confusing is it states that Sidney was taking all three girls to school, yet in Scream 5, we only see her taking two of them to school. Where was Hannah the eldest in Scream 5 if they all three get dropped off at school together in 6 according to this draft? It kind of feels adding a third child was shoehorned in, but maybe they could have explained briefly why we didn't see her in Scream 5 in that scene when Dewey calls Sidney and she's pushing the stroller. Now, in terms of this theory that I had after Scream 5 was released, I was convinced there was a possibility that Sidney could actually be Samantha's real mother based on a few clues that I picked up on in Scream 5 that I spoke about in one of my first videos that I posted here on the channel, that I also mentioned a few times in live streams, so on and so forth, after Scream 5 was released. I will leave that video displayed at the end of this video. Be sure to check it out and let me know you guys' thoughts if you have not viewed that video yet. I feel with all the clues that I mentioned in that video, added in with the fact that this original draft had some key scenes and moments that seemed to hint at Sidney and Samantha's relationship growing and being at the forefront of the story, especially when you consider the chosen family line and the conversation about family that was supposed to be Sidney and Sam's scene instead of Gail like we got in Scream 6. It just sounds like to me that the possibility of Sidney being revealed as Samantha's real mother at some point was very possible. Most fans felt for Scream 6 that Sidney had to have a legit reason to show up if she was going to be in the film and battle Ghostface once more. It couldn't be her just there to help the group while leaving her family behind. Dewey's death in Scream 5 was a legit enough reason to get her to show up in that film. Gail's attacks in Scream 6 would have most likely made her come help, especially when you consider that Sidney referred to Gail as family in this draft when she's being taken to the hospital. But according to this version of the script, Sidney was set to arrive before Gail was even attacked. So Sidney choosing to leave her family behind to help the Carpenter sisters and the twins just doesn't feel right. But it also feels to me there has to be a reason why Sidney was running towards the danger as opposed to running from it like before. A reason that has such great meaning and could explain why she seems to be so protective over these girls, Samantha in particular. This may have been eating at her for years, but when she somehow finds out that these newest attacks are revolving around the child of Billy Loomis, this gives her another reason outside of Dewey's death to show up. This would explain how she knew Samantha's true identity without us the fans seeing or hearing confirmation that she was notified of Sam's true identity, and could explain why she seems to be obsessed with protecting her, maybe feeling by being there for her when it matters the most, she can right the wrongs of the past. In my opinion, that wouldn't have been a bad character arc for Sidney, considering, as I mentioned before, there have been moments where she has mirrored her mother Maureen throughout the franchise in spurts. With Maureen coming to her in a dream in Scream 3, saying "you're just like me," having Sidney attempt to protect the secret child that she had with Billy would be the character breaking away from the stigma of being just like her mother, or committing an act or acts similar to what her mother committed, as Sidney, at the very least, is attempting to help Samantha, the complete opposite of what Maureen attempted to do for Roman. Think about this for a second, y'all. If all these original plans would have went through, Sidney would have been in Samantha's life when it matters the most more than her alleged mother Christina Carpenter would have been, who was never seen in films 5 or 6, only mentioned. When you add in how close it seems that Sidney and Sam would have become, based on what we've seen written in this draft of the script, in my opinion, this wouldn't have been done for no reason. They were setting up something between these two characters that would have impacted the franchise in the story, which would explain Sidney's persistence to be involved and running towards the danger. But that's just my opinion. Unfortunately, we may never know if this was indeed the plan for these characters, or if they were just trying to have these two characters have a deep bond because of their connection to Billy Loomis. This draft also states that Sidney, not Kirby, would have been the one to drop the TV on Ethan's head, much like she did to Stu Macher in the original, and she would have said the line, "Second time I've done that, if you can believe it. Works every time." Now I will say this. If that would have happened with Sidney being the one to drop the TV on Ethan's head and say what she said to him in the actual film, then I might have to concede to the case made by fans who don't believe in the theory that Stu Macher is alive, that Kirby dropping the TV on Ethan's head was a clear-cut way of the creators telling the Stu truthers out there that he is in fact dead. If it had been Sidney in that scene and not Kirby, then I'd have to say that case would have been a lot stronger to be made. I feel with Sidney being the one to reenact what she did to Stu to Ethan and say what she said, if the newer creators were trying to silence the noise of the Stu Macher is alive theory, that would be how they would do it, and having Sidney's character do the deed and say the line she said is far more believable than Kirby's character and her dialogue in conveying the message that Stu is dead. But even if they did go through with this or had the chance to phrase it better, I still believe there is too much evidence there that hinted at the possibility of Stu Macher still being alive, especially with Gail's attack scene. And keep in mind, in another draft that I touched on months ago in a previous video, the plans for Gail's attack scene was literally an homage to Sidney and Stu's fight scene in the original film. So I think even if Nev was in Scream 6 and they went through what was planned in this draft or some of the other drafts that came out, I still think the Easter eggs pointing to Stu being alive would still be incorporated in there subtly like we've seen in both Scream 5 and Scream 6. As for the original ending for Samantha Carpenter's character, instead of her dropping her dad's mask on the ground, she drops it down a gutter. Now, no one could have foresaw what was going to happen between Melissabarrera and the studio, but when you think about how things played out, this ending would have been a far better ending to close out the Carpenter storyline, as her dropping the mask in the gutter instead of on the ground makes it seem more clear that she could be moving on from Ghostface even more, and that her story is over, even if we know that's not what was originally intended for the character. The draft also states that Mindy would have been confirmed alive but off screen and not present at the end of the film. They should have kept and used this idea, because her showing up from the hospital in the end of the actual film after being stabbed on the subway, somehow knowing that Ethan and Bailey were the killers, was just a bunch of goofy shit that didn't make any lick of sense, that served no purpose whatsoever. Now, according to the rest of the article, Sidney's presence was not the only major change in the original script for Scream 6. In this version of the script, the aged Ghostface masks do not factor into the story. There are no Easter eggs left at each crime scene for Bailey and Kirby to trace Ghostface's plan. In the warehouse shrine, the killer's original masks are on display altogether. Only there, when Samantha is drawn to her father's mask, is it mentioned that the mask is withered and cracked, gray now instead of white. The cat and mouse bodega scene was actually a result of cutting an action-packed sequence that referenced one of the most unnerving scenes in Scream 2, when Sid and Hallie, Elise Neal, are kidnapped and trapped in a cop car. After Sam and Tara run into the bodega, they escape out the back door and flag down a taxi cab. Ghostface attacks the sisters through the back window and also stabs the cab driver. The car is T-boned by a truck and they crash upside down in the middle of Manhattan. This sounds like a very expensive sequence, which may explain the longer bodega sequence taking its place. Another intended cameo was Dwayne Martin's Joel Jones, returning as Gail's producer. She asks him to investigate the rumors about Samantha being the killer on Reddit. He responds, "This is you getting involved with murders again? We need to do what I did at Windsor and just peace the fuck out." After calling Gail to supply her with the origin post about Samantha's being the killer, Joel escapes from LaGuardia Airport with a callback farewell. Good luck surviving your movie, or whatever the fuck it's about this time. Joel out. Unused ideas and lines from past movies were incorporated into Scream 2022 and Scream 6. For example, in Gail's chase scene, she says, "You've been in my life so fucking long, I made you and you made me. You want to try and finish this?" Adding a line scripted but cut from Scream 4, "Go ahead if you've got the guts." Kevin Williamson's major unused idea for the original Scream 4 involved the killer, Jill Emma Roberts, surviving. This concept was later used in his TV show The Following. Liana Liberato's character, Quinn, would have been shot superficially in the head, not in the center. When she comes back for one last scare, she is tased by Tara and left unconscious. As Sam is about to finish her off, Tara makes a surprising request: "I want her to live. I want her to suffer, please." This could have led to a Silence of the Lambs as Hook for Scream 7. Okay, so first touching on the fact that the mask would not have been made a big part of the storyline like we would end up seeing in the 6th film, I actually like what they did in Scream 6 by showcasing the old worn out mask prominently, because it gave each one used or left at each crime scene a sense of purpose, not only to characters like Sam and Kirby, but it also played in really well as being a part of superfan and killer Richie Kirsch's obsession with the story and characters behind the Stab films. I also feel leaving the mask as possible clues as to who the killers could be or why they are doing what they are doing was very reminiscent of what Roman Bridger did in Scream 3, which I enjoyed. I feel sticking with this original idea from this draft of having the mask with robes sitting in cases not being used would have been seen as a wasted opportunity had they went in this direction, especially because having the old cracked mask be worn during the entire film in Scream 6 gave Ghostface a fresh look. Billy's mask was said to be more withered and gray textured because of the wear and tear, which I won't lie, I kind of wish they would have stuck with that idea just to further give Ghostface a more darker and grittier look. I really wish they would have stuck with this idea of Ghostface attacking the Carpenter sisters in a taxi cab as they attempt to escape from the bodega. I feel it really would have capitalized on the New York setting in ways that I feel that they failed at doing so in the actual film. Sure, the subway scene was okay, but it left a lot to be desired in my opinion. Had this scene would have happened, it would have been one of the more fun and exciting scenes to watch play out in the Scream franchise in my opinion, and it would have been a fantastic homage to Sidney and Hallie being attacked in a cop car in Scream 2. If the reason for cutting this out was because it would have been more on the expensive side for this scene, then that's a real letdown and a little concerning for future ideas for future Scream films, because us fans always talk about raising the bar in terms of suspense for particular moments or scenes. Sometimes you have to spend a little bit more money to make the vision for what you want in the moment come to life, and it just seems the higher ups at Spyglass don't want to go that extra mile financially to make certain ideas like this one come to fruition if it's going to cost more than they're willing to put in. Let's hope ideas that are actually good ones like this doesn't get scrapped for weaker/safer material in Scream 7. I'm not saying the bodega chase scene was a bad idea, it wasn't at all. But compared to this scrap scene and the outcome and location, I feel the scrap scene would have been the better choice. Moving on to the idea of Joel the cameraman from Scream 2 returning in the 6th film, I really wish they would have kept this idea and it would have happened. The dialogue written in this draft fits the character so well, and many fans want to see Joel come back, so this idea would have hit well on so many levels had they would have went through with it. For the first time in franchise history, it is revealed in this draft that Joel's last name is Jones. This is something that fans have always wondered, and we were going to get that clarification had they would have went through with him making his return in the 6th film. It is also worth noting that Joel would have been Gail's producer this time around, a big step up from being just her cameraman. And that could have meant that the two never really lost touch and may have been working together ever since Scream 2, or possibly started again when Gail moved back to New York before doing her split up before the events of Scream 5. Hopefully, this is an idea that gets revisited for Scream 7. I would love to see Dwayne Martin reprise his role as Joel, like many of us do. Now, in terms of using the unused idea that was meant for Jill Roberts in the original concept for Scream 5 on Liana Liberato's character Quinn Bailey, I just feel had that happened, it wouldn't have had much of an impact because we didn't get to know the character much, and she wasn't the brainchild behind these murders. Her father was, and the motive was pretty cut and dry, as it was flat out revenge. It wouldn't have had the impact nor the freshness that Jill's motive brought to the table. That would have made this idea work for her character because Jill's motive wasn't based on revenge. She wanted the fame that Sidney got from being a final girl of a town massacre. So the idea of keeping her alive as a killer who lives to be in the next film would have made sense. Using this idea for Quinn's character just wouldn't have made sense in my opinion. I will say not featuring Quinn more or actually making her the lead killer was a missed opportunity because I think out of all three of the killers in Scream 6 between her father Wayne and her brother Ethan, Quinn was the most believable in terms of coming across as somewhat intimidating. I think this shot of her here in this overlay is one of the best shots we've got from a killer in the entire franchise in terms of looking intimidating and twisted all in the same moment. Now, quickly going back to Sidney and this script, another thing that doesn't make sense in terms of her explanation as to why she is chasing the danger and going to New York to help the Carpenter sisters. She tells Mark it always ends up at their doorstep. The issue with this is if this is how she feels, then leaving her family makes even less sense, because if you feel the danger is going to end up at your doorstep at some point, then you shouldn't be leaving, or you wouldn't be leaving your family. Now, you could say by her going to confront the new killers in New York is preventing an attack on her family. However, if they have been operating on cult-like rules since Scream 5, like many of us assume, given the fact even Sidney wouldn't know how many killers there are actually involved this time around, her going to help the Core 4 and Gail opens up the door for her family to still be attacked while she is away. This is why most of the dialogue written for her in this draft makes no sense to me, and after reading this, I think Nev exiting Scream 6 was the best thing that could have happened for Sidney's character. I have a newfound respect for how they've written her out of Scream 6 as not coming to New York and taking her family to a safe place. It was not only a simple and effective choice, it simply makes more sense for the character. So overall, I must say this draft for Sidney and in general is kind of to me. I'm sure had Nev been in the movie, things would have gotten edited and tweaked for her character, but I just feel unless you're going to pay off the angle of Sidney's persistence on protecting the Carpenter sisters, whether shocking revelation or backstory, all of this running towards the danger, leaving her family behind for no legitimate reason other than just to help, would have fell flat. As I mentioned earlier, Kirby Reed being left DOA for a second time was a bad idea, along with not incorporating the Ghostface costumes from previous killers into the storyline. I just feel the only real solid idea coming from this draft would have been bringing Joel's character back. Outside of that, I'm pretty happy with the version of Scream 6 that we got, even though it does have its flaws, because after what I just read, it just feels like 6 would have been a hot mess had this version would have been put on screen. Now, yes, some will say this version could have been tweaked and re-edited, and it could have came out better. But keep in mind, the version that we did get was tweaked and re-edited as well, but not by much. When you read the draft for the version of Scream 6 that we got, 95%, and you can even make the argument that 97 or 98% of what was written in that draft made it onto the big screen. My point is that these writers keep most of what they originally planned for the characters in their dialogue intact, meaning this version most likely wouldn't be too different from an edited version. Meaning, had this version made it to the big screen, most of what we read in this draft would have been playing out on screen, which again, based on the reasons I touched on in this video, make me happy and content with the version of the film that we got, and that this originally planned version of Scream 6 didn't happen. But okay everyone, that is it for this video. Leave a comment in the comment section below and let me know your thoughts on this original draft script for Scream 6. Do you like how Sidney would have been incorporated into the events going on in New York? Would you have cared if they left Kirby Reed DOA for a second time? And how would you feel if they used the idea meant for Joe Roberts' character for Quinn Bailey's character, along with everything else that was in this draft? Once again, I am Marcus, and this is Shot 6 Times YouTube Horror Movie Channel. Be sure to follow me on all my social media platforms. Thank you all for watching.